Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing well. We're a little bit bored over here at our house, so just thought I would have a little fun today. Alex is in the next room and he's working on his sermon for the week. And I know that he is talking about truth, and our new series is called Sleight of Hand. So I found a great experiment that I think he will ultimately enjoy, and I will enjoy conducting this experiment to entertain myself a little bit. So maybe you can watch and it goes well. Hey Alex, can you come help me with a video for my class?
What?
Can you come in here for a second and help me with a video for my class?
A video?
Yeah, I'm all set up, I'm recording, I just need you to come sit down.
Okay.
So, with your permission, I'm gonna ask if you would just wear this blindfold, and I'm going to light a match and then blow it out and then hold it on your arm just to see how long it will take before you kind of tell me to stop.
I'm not sure I want to do this.
Well, I mean, it's up to you, but it would really help me with my class.
Okay.
Please, it'll be really fun. You'll love it.
Okay.
And I promise that I'll stop whenever you say.
Okay.
And I don't think it'll hurt that bad because I'm going to blow the match out.
Is this yours?
Yes.
Okay.
I know it. You can flip it this way so it's just white. Well, it's less. Well, no. Just do it. It's okay. You might need to take your glasses off.
It smells a little.
So you do that. And which arm? It smells. Whatever. Okay. So here's my match.
Don't hold it too long.
No,
This is
not. Well, I will. I
freaking
promise
me out.
you that I will stop whenever you tell me to. Okay.
Okay. Wait.
Okay. Ready?
Wait. Okay, hold on.
Okay. Well, we
Is
have
this
to do.
gonna hurt? Okay, do it.
Okay.
Do it.
Tell me when.
Ah! You're burning me!
You can take your blindfold off now.
What in the world?
It was just ice.
Babe.
It wasn't really a match. It was just ice. See?
Well, that really burned.
It's just sleight of hand.
Oh, so I see what this is. This is a trick for me.
Right. It's not really for my students. It's for you. Because you're talking about truth. And I thought this might serve a purpose.
Okay. Well, thanks.
You're welcome. I didn't really burn you, I promise.
Hey, good morning, Mosaic Church, and everyone watching around the world. My name is Alex Diaz, and I am one of the teaching pastors here at Mosaic Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I hope everybody is doing well, and it is my privilege to continue on this series called Sleight of Hand, Overcoming the Deceptions of the Heart. And I want to start with this verse, John chapter 8, verse 32, and it says this: "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Now, let me clarify a few things about that video that you just watched. First of all, my wife really does love me. She really does. She wanted you to know that. Secondly, I needed to learn the truth that we were actually experiencing the touch of ice and not fire. And today we're going to be talking about truth. In fact, the title of this message is Truth is the Antidote. Everybody repeat it at home. Truth is the antidote. Remember when you were young and you were afraid of the dark? I don't know about you, but when I was a young child, all the way up into my teen years, I was afraid of the dark so much that I had to sleep with the lights on. Over time, my parents began to speak truth into my life. They would say things like, "Son, we are always here. We are protecting you. Nothing is ever going to happen." And I was able to take that truth in my life and eventually understand that nothing bad was going to happen to me as long as my parents were there. Well, now I am proud to tell you I have grown out of that. I am a brave and courageous adult. Now, when I'm in the middle of the night and I hear a sound that sounds like something is about to happen, I am brave enough to wake up my pregnant wife and send her to see what's going on. Not really. I try to go myself. But I wanted to point out the fact that my parents had to tell me a truth, and that truth became what removed fear and deception in my life. That truth became the antidote for me. There is a truth that Jesus was developing in the chapter 8 of the book of John, and is a truth that is pointing to the fact that he is greater than what those people had experienced up until that point. In fact, the idea that I want us to keep in mind as we read this verse is that Jesus is teaching that truth always leads to freedom. This is what he says in the book of John, chapter 8, verses 33 and 34. They answered to Jesus, the people that were opposing him while he was teaching in Jerusalem, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" And Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." Did you notice that? Jesus is developing the idea that they don't really know the truth, that there's a deception that they needed to discover. That is the first thing that I want us to learn today as we understand how truth is the antidote and how we can overcome the deceptions of our hearts and our minds. Is we have to identify the deception, we have to identify the lie. This is what Jesus is doing for these people that were opposing him as he is teaching. He's saying, you think you are free, but you are not really free, because you are slaves to something that is greater. You are slaves to sin. It's almost like an invisible chain that is around their hearts. There is a way that I can explain this to you. If you've ever been to the circus, you have probably seen elephants. Now, when I've been to the circus myself, I have wondered, how do elephants stay under this tent and not run away? And the way they do this is when they are young elephants, they put chains around their ankles. And those chains are set there in case they try to run away, and they do. They pull as hard as they can for many days. But then one day something happens. They realize that they cannot pull hard enough. They realize that there's no way that they can run away from those chains, and eventually they give up. And once they do that, they remove those chains, and the elephant knows that it has no freedom. It believes these invisible chains that remain in the mind, but no longer remain around the ankles. This is the same way that we interpret and feel sin in our lives, is that it's an invisible chain, and without Jesus, we cannot get rid of it. But once we allow Jesus into our hearts, once we say, yes, your sacrifice is what cleanses me of my sin and gives me freedom, it delivers me, then at that point, those chains are gone. But for some of us, we allow those chains to remain as deceptions in our minds. And those deceptions become invisible chains that we have to identify. The way that I want us to remember it is in this way. Invisible chains can be more powerful oftentimes than visible obstacles. The invisible chains of our minds, whatever we believe, whatever has been programmed into our hearts and our lives, can be more powerful than visible obstacles. If you are believing in invisible chains, there is something that you can do. You can replace those invisible chains with supernatural truth. The supernatural truth that Jesus has died for you, and he has given you a freedom that you no longer have to be bound by those invisible chains. Do you understand that? That whatever is coming to your mind right now is nothing compared to the freedom and the deliverance that comes from God right now in the middle of this crisis. There are many ideas that are being planted in our minds because of loneliness, because of desperation, because of the loss of income, or perhaps the loss of health, or maybe even the loss of a relationship or a person in your life. If that is the case, those seeds can be planted and we suffer through them. And sometimes it is right to suffer through them and to feel the way that we feel. However, they are not meant to hold us back. We can now feel free from those seeds that have been planted in our minds. If you have been overwhelmed with sadness, if you've been overwhelmed with loneliness, if you have been overwhelmed with anxiety, if you have been overwhelmed with pain, I want you to understand that whatever chains exist in your mind, Jesus can completely remove, and you can at some point experience that freedom. That's why we have to identify the deception. We keep reading in verses 35 and 36 of the book of John. A slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. I love these words because I tell my 6-year-old boy, you will always be my baby. And I cannot wait for when he's a teenager and I embarrass him in front of his friends by kissing him and hugging him. I cannot wait until he's in his 30s and 40s, and I will always continue to treat him as a son, so I can relate to that. Jesus keeps saying, if the Son sets you free, listen to this, you will be free indeed. Jesus is speaking a truth to these people who did not know they were slaves themselves. And the truth is that the greatest kind of freedom can only come from a deliverance that comes from Jesus himself, from the Son of God. Here's the second thing that we do once we identify the deception, is we have to speak truth to that deception. You have to speak truth to any lie or any weight that is in your mind, to any piece of anxiety or sadness or loneliness or desperation. You have to speak. What truth? The truth of the gospel. The fact that the creator of our world and our universe gave his one and only son for you and me. His son who was blameless. His son who took a step in order to be hung on a cross and sacrifice his blameless life to pay the penalty for your sin and my sin. That same one who defeated death on the third day after being buried in a tomb and conquered that tomb, conquered death, and is alive today. You are loved by that God. That God considers you his dear son or his dear daughter. And that truth ought to give you a different type of joy that the world cannot give you. There are last names in today's world that carry the fingerprints of cultures from a long time ago. If you've ever heard the last name McIntyre or McGregor, if you've heard that last name, that very first piece, that Mac, it has nothing to do with McDonald's. It means in the original language, son of or daughter of. The same thing happens in Spanish, my first language. Last names used to have the word of and then the last name. It was a way of identifying people by saying, I am the son of, in my case, my father, his name is Herman, not German. Everybody say at home, if you're an English speaker, Herman. Some of you got it. If I were to use that same principle, I would go around this world saying, I am the son of Herman, el hijo de Herman. And I love feeling that because I love my father and my father loves me. In the same way, you have to understand that through life, you are the son of Jesus. You are the daughter of Jesus. You carry that banner with you. And he conquered death and came back to life and now lives in your heart. You are the son of the originator of that power. And that ought to give you a different kind of joy because you now have a new name. That is a truth that you need to understand. And that truth will help you dismantle the tricks that happen in your mind and the strategy of the devil. Whenever there is a lie or a deception that is planted in your mind, you have to speak truth into that Jesus is your father, that you are his. And that leads us to understanding, how do I know that I am his? Well, I jumped over a verse in that same chapter, which is verse 31. And Jesus says this in verse 31 of John chapter 8. If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Did you get that? He is basically saying, if I am a seed that is planted in you, then that fruit ought to reflect that seed. If you are abiding by my teachings, you're not doing that to earn your salvation. That forgiveness, that deliverance was given to you on the cross for free. But the way that we know that we are his children is because we are thirsty to give him honor. We are thirsty to align ourselves with the way that he wants us to live, because that is the way that bears fruit, exponential fruit, the fruit of love and kindness and joy onto a world that is lacking and needing that. And no matter the circumstances, no matter how many viruses come our way, no matter how many situations come our way, we can bear the fruit of Jesus in our lives. And that is a truth that is planted in us. Once we identify the deception, we speak the truth of the gospel onto that deception. Then we learn the third thing that Jesus is showing us. And it's in verses 44 through 46. And it says this, Jesus telling these people who were giving him obstacles and giving him lip. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. And then he says, when he lies, he's talking about Satan, when he lies, he speaks his native language. Did you know that the devil speaks a native language? That his first language is not Spanish, is not English. By the way, Spanish could never be that because it's the language of heaven. His first language is the language of lies. And it says he speaks that language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet, says John chapter 8, the words of Jesus, because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? I am blameless and you are not able to prove otherwise. If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Jesus is saying, why can't you trust what I am saying? Why can't you trust that I can give you freedom, that I can deliver you? Why can't you trust that I've already taken off those chains from around your spiritual feet and that you are free from that? Why can't you trust who I am and what I am saying? This is the third thing that he's teaching us. Firstly, we have to identify the deception. Secondly, we have to be able to speak truth to that deception. And thirdly, we have to trust God with the rest. We have to trust God with everything. And see, this concept of trust is very important because it is during times of crisis that we begin to understand how to trust a powerful God. All of this began for me with a visit to my therapist. Yes, I have a therapist. I am a person who needs help from time to time, and I need help from somebody who can guide me, and I'm not ashamed of that. And so my Christ-following therapist was listening to some of the deceptions that were blooming in my heart. And he taught me this principle that I need to put every lie that comes into my heart, every arrow of deception that Satan throws at me through a grid of 3 steps. And he called it the tale, the truth, and the trust. In other words, that when I receive a deceptive thought, when a lie blooms in my mind and in my heart, I have to identify it as a tale or a lie. There's a tale that Satan is throwing my way. I have to speak truth to it, and then I have to trust God with the rest. And then we did an exercise. And he said, what is the deceptive thought that you are having? And I said, one of the strongest deceptive thoughts that I have ever experienced is the fear that I would, at some point or another, not be worthy enough to keep the blessings that God has given me. In other words, that I would lose at some point, for whatever reason, my family, my children, my calling, or anything that God has given me. So my therapist said, well, you've identified the tale, you've identified the lie. Now you have to speak truth onto that. What is the truth that you're speaking onto that? And I said that I am God's son, that he loves me, that he died for me on the cross, and that no matter what blessing he has given me, he loves me. And he has given me those blessings because he loves me. He said, well done. And now what is the third step? And I made a mistake. I said that I have to trust him, that he will never remove those blessings from my life. And he said, that's wrong. Because there's no guarantee that those things will remain in your life. You have to trust him, not that he will never remove that. You have to trust him that if those things were to disappear, he would still love you and he would still have your back. That was a brand new revelation for my life. And I understood at that point that the level of trust that God wants me to have is the same level of trust that I had with my parents back when I was a young child and a teenager, afraid of the dark, knowing that whatever would linger, that they would always be there and they would always have my back. I remember the story of David, who as a young teenager was anointed to be king. And in that process of growing into his anointing, King Saul became very jealous of him and he persecuted him for 10 years. A promise had been given, and for 10 years, David could not get a hold of that promise. And he built a band of ragamuffins and misfits and went into the desert. And he had opportunities to kill King Saul, yet he never took them because God had called that man to that role. And in the middle of his desperation, he wrote several psalms. And I remember especially Psalm 63. And at the beginning of that psalm, he says, my God, my soul thirsts for you. And then he says in verses 6 through 8, I remember you at night and I think of you through the watches of the evening. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. Because you are my help. In the middle of this persecution, in the middle of this danger, I can cling to you because you uphold me. Whenever we have to be in a place, in a valley of the shadow of death, the way that we can let go of fear is by trusting God that he will uphold us, that he is with us, and that he loves us. How does this look like on a day-to-day basis for you? Well, whatever deception is blooming in your mind, whatever lie or even whatever pain, you have to put through that grit. You have to identify it. You have to speak the truth of the gospel onto it. And then you have to trust God with all that is known and unknown. You have to make sure that you are allowing him to work through those obstacles and through that season. You have to trust him with the known obstacles and even the unknown outcomes, because that is the beginning of a peaceful mind. Whatever is coming your way, whatever is brewing in your heart, you have to speak truth into it once you've identified it. And then you have to trust God with the rest. And so my question to you is this: what deception are you believing? What lie from the devil are you believing? What is the pain that is brewing in your mind and in your heart? What is the point of tension? What is the source of your anxiety or the source of your desperation or loneliness? What have you lost or who have you lost that has planted a seed inside of you of fear and pain? And whatever that is, I am not asking you to not feel those things. I am asking you to speak truth onto those things and trust in God with the rest. I will finish with this. We were walking down a trail here in the state of Arkansas recently with my family. And it was the end of the afternoon, so the sun began to set. And while we were in the middle of the woods, my son began to feel some fear. So did my daughter. Because as a little boy and a little girl, they were wondering what's going to happen to us if we're walking down this trail and it gets dark and we are left in the middle of the woods with no flashlights and no help and no way to see the trail. They were not verbalizing it that way, but they began to develop some tears. And so their mother and I got on our knees and we spoke to them and said, even if it gets dark, we will find a way out of here. And as it began to get dark, we were able to find our way out, made it to the parking lot, got in our cars, and got home with enough time to spare. If you're in the middle of a moment of darkness and that darkness has been brewing from your heart, maybe there have been some deceptions in your soul that have been growing because of pain you're experiencing or a loss that you're experiencing. I want you to understand that God is with you. Even if you're walking through the valley of death, you don't have to fear any evil because He is with you. That is the truth that can lead you to peace, to freedom, and that can help you as an antidote to whatever deception is coming into your mind. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray for whoever is watching this broadcast, whoever is under the sound of my voice, that you will speak life into them, that you will give them freedom from chains that, if they have given their lives to you, are no longer there. I pray for the ones who have never taken that step, that you will convict them and convince them to let go of the sin in their lives, so they no longer have to experience the invisible chains that are coming from the devil, but they can experience freedom and freedom in you. You lead us all toward peace, especially in a season of crisis, in a season of pain. May we be able to experience the peace that surpasses all understanding, because your truth is the antidote to the deception of our hearts. I pray these things in your name, Jesus, Son of God. Amen.